Hey everyone, long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. No, wait a minute, that's not how it goes. It was a long time ago, but it wasn't that far away when and where I'd instruct swimming to kids. I'd first try to get them to float. I'd hold my hands underneath them in the water, and I'd assure them that they had nothing to be afraid of because my hands were there to support them. After a while, they'd usually relax, but then when I'd tell them that they were doing great and that I was going to slowly remove my hands from underneath them so they would float on their own, but I'd keep my hands close in case they needed it, what do you think would happen? Yep, many of them would almost immediately start flailing their arms because they didn't trust me to be there for them when they couldn't feel my hands underneath them, and they couldn't be absolutely sure there was no risk at all that they might start to sink. We're concluding a series called Risky Business, and many people struggle to trust whenever there's much of any risk involved in life, and there's the fear of sinking. But here's the reality. Every relationship entails some risk, and trust is essential to healthy relationships, whether that's with family or with friends or with God. There's a happening described in the Gospel of Matthew about water and risk and relationship. It takes place right after Jesus does something miraculous, feeding 5,000 people from 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Immediately, Jesus told his followers to get into the boat and go ahead of him across the lake. He stayed there to send the people home. After he had sent them away, he went by himself up into the hills to pray. It was late, and Jesus was there alone. By this time, the boat was already far away from land. It was being hit by waves because the wind was blowing against it. The followers of Jesus did what he wanted them to do. They got into the boat and they launched out into the water. What could go wrong? Because they were doing what Jesus wanted, right? But what happens? The wind starts to whip. The boat begins to be battered by the waves. When things are fine, when you're being supported, when things are going well for you as you are floating along in life, and you don't think there's any risk of you sinking, trust doesn't seem too hard, does it? But when a storm descends, when you really need someone to come through for you, isn't that when you learn what trust is really all about? Storms in life are when the gut checks of trust take place. It's true in families, in businesses, in churches. When life is good for you, when you have a job, when you have a house and a car and a boat, when you and your kids are healthy, is it hard for you to trust? But what about when the sky turns dark? When the wind picks up, when the waves start crashing in, are you still able to trust in the whole God thing? Do you think God is trustworthy only when there are no storms in life? Do you think God is trustworthy only when your life is smooth sailing and you have what you want and you get what you want? But when the waters get choppy, when life is not calm or serene or storm-free, you're not sure about the whole trusting in God thing. Besides teaching kids to swim, again a long time ago and somewhat further away, I instructed sailing to kids. Once when we were far out in the water in our small sunfish sailboats, a storm blew in suddenly. How do you imagine they reacted? Yep, total panic. Okay, back to Jesus' disciples who were in a boat in the middle of a storm. Between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. When his followers saw him walking on the water, they were afraid. They said, "It's a ghost," and cried out in fear. But Jesus quickly spoke to them. "Have courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." Jesus' disciples were terrified. They were panicked. And how often is that true of us in the storms of life? We question, why am I dealing with this? Why can't I have a storm-free life? That's the life I want. That's the life I expect. Well, that may be the life you want and expect, but that's not the life you're going to get. Jesus is upfront about this. He says, because of the sin, selfishness, brokenness in the world, here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. The issue in life is not, will trials and sorrows come your way? They will. The issue is, will you trust Jesus to help you overcome them? When I was in the 8th grade, let's just say that my trust was not in Jesus. It was in myself. It certainly was not in my parents, who believed nothing good would come from my being out past midnight as an 8th grader. There was this one night when midnight passed, and then 1 o'clock passed, and then 2 o'clock passed, and then 3 o'clock passed, and I still wasn't home. Sometime around 4 o'clock in the morning, the guy who was chauffeuring me and another 8th grade buddy of mine around drives us up to my house, approaching very slowly, and he thought quietly. But there was my dad sitting in a chair on our front porch. And I experienced what Jesus said. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. And I can assure you that a storm started to descend. It was sometime around 4 o'clock in the morning, with a storm already having descended, when Jesus approaches the boat the disciples are in. Did you notice that as Jesus approached the disciples, they did not recognize him? They were terrified because they didn't know who he was and didn't know the power to overcome that he possessed. Is that why a lot of us may struggle with fear and anxiety? Because we don't truly know Jesus and we don't truly trust in the power he has to help us overcome. In my own life, I know I failed to realize Jesus was working in ways that I did not recognize at the time. There have been times I've thought things like, God, show me what you're doing. Make it clear. But I failed to recognize what God was already doing in that moment because I was failing to trust that God would be at work. More and more now, it's the knowledge I do have of Jesus that keeps me afloat when the storms of life start to descend on me, when the wind and waves of adversity start to roll over me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you truly know Jesus in that way? Does your relationship with Jesus bring you confidence in the uncertain times? Does your relationship with Jesus bring you courage in the hard, threatening, scary times of life? Or do doubts creep in? You begin to wonder if any of this God stuff is true. The whole trust in Jesus thing to you seems too much of a risk to bet your life on. Henry Nouwen writes about some trapeze artists with whom he became friends. They shared with him about the very special relationship between the flyer and the catcher on the trapeze. When the flyer swings high above the crowd, the time will come when he lets go of his trapeze and lunges out into the air. In that moment, which can feel like forever, the flyer floats in the nothingness of air. He simply must embrace with absolute trust that the catcher will be there for him at just the right moment. The flyer is not to anxiously flail about, because that might lead to his plummeting downward. The flyer must simply trust that the catcher will be there when he's needed the most, and that trusting can be the hardest part of it all. Isn't that true for us as well? But it's only when we truly trust in Jesus that we can genuinely hear and heed what he says. It is I. Do not be afraid. Let's say that you're in the midst of some storm in your life, and you do recognize that Jesus is present with you. How likely are you to trust in the Lord the way Peter did, at least initially? Peter said, "Lord, if it is really you, then command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." And Peter left the boat and walked on the water to Jesus. Now, admittedly, Peter is still hedging his bets. He asks if it is the Lord. He has trouble believing if it's really Jesus and if Jesus has the power to walk on water. And this is true, remember, right after Peter had seen Jesus feed 5,000 people from 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But give Peter credit. When Jesus commanded him to come to him, what did Peter do? He got out of the boat and he walked on the water. Don't miss that. Peter actually got out of the boat and actually walked on the water. And don't miss this. What did the other disciples do? They stayed in the boat. They didn't take the risk of trusting Jesus enough to get out of the boat. The other disciples thought they were playing it safe. The other disciples were trying to hold on for dear life to what they thought was secure and could be counted on. But in the storms of life, there is no safer place to be, no more secure place to be than to be with Jesus wherever that may be. Jesus was walking on the water. The boat could have sunk, and the other disciples with it. The boat was not the safe place to be because Jesus was not there. Jesus was in the midst of the storm. And wherever Jesus is, that's the safest place, the most secure place to be, even if, and especially if, it's in the midst of a storm. The most dangerous place in the world to be is to be apart from Jesus. Here's something I think a lot of us struggle with. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. If you want to do something amazing in your life, you need to obey Jesus' command regardless of the risk. Until you're willing to do that, you can't say you have the depth of trust that will be life transforming. Jesus is in effect saying to us, trust me, live the life I'm calling you to live. do the things I'm asking you to do, give the way I'm asking you to give, if you do, it will be all right. If you genuinely desire an intimate relationship with Jesus, if you want to embark on the adventure of following Jesus with your one and only life, if you want to make a godly difference with your life and become all that God wants you to be, there will be times when you must get out of the boat, get out of your comfort zone. We saw that in the video clip about how the couple answered the question of what they would do with their one and only life, in that though it was scary, leaving behind what was comfortable and familiar to them, they took the risk of responding to God's call in order to find and experience eternal significance. How many of us want that? How many of us desperately want to come to Jesus and to experience His presence in a life-altering way? We may be like Peter and get out of the boat of our complacency and start out on the adventure of faith. But then what happens? We start focusing on something other than Jesus. Because the storms of life that come our way, they seem to be too much for us. But when Peter saw the wind and the waves, he became afraid and began to sink. He shouted, "Lord, save me!" Immediately, Jesus reached out His hand and caught Peter. Jesus said, "Your faith is small. Why did you doubt?" Get that? When Peter's faith faltered and he began to sink in doubt, Jesus did not abandon him. Immediately, Jesus reached out to him. Jesus didn't give up on him, and Jesus doesn't give up on us. Like the band sang about, "God, I still got my struggles, but you're close to the broken heart. Lord, even when I'm falling in mercy's arms." Jesus didn't say Peter had no faith. He said Peter's faith was too small. Is Jesus saying that to you? Is Jesus saying, you started out on the adventure of faith, you started to trust me, you began to follow me passionately, but you've gotten distracted by the cares and temptations of the world. You've lost sight of me because you're focused on the problems of the world instead of the possibilities of faith. Is that what's taking place in your life right now? And one day, you may look back on your life and reflect on what you missed out on, like Greg Lavoie wrote about. The great, bold prayers you never prayed. The exhilarating risks you never took. The sacrificial gifts you never offered. The lives you never touched. And you're sitting in a recliner with a shriveled soul and forgotten dreams. And you realized there's a world of desperate need and a God calling you to be a part of something bigger than yourself. You see the person you could have become, but did not. You never followed your calling. You never got out of the boat. Is that the kind of life you want? Really? Or will you genuinely take the risk of faith and get out of the boat and trust Jesus with all of who you are, with all of what you have, with all of who you may become? How will you respond when, like in the drama, God whispers to you, "I've been calling out to you. I've been waiting for you. I love you. It's a love that can heal your wounds and mend your broken heart. Come to me. I'm here for you. So, what's it going to be for you? You get to decide. Right now, would you bow your heads and would you close your eyes? And I'm going to be leading in a prayer of commitment, a prayer of faith. And if you're willing to get out of the boat and trust your life to Jesus, I invite you to pray quietly this prayer along with me. Dear Jesus, I've been day after day living for me and what I wanted. Been living a life of complacency, a life that hasn't been really going anywhere. I've been living selfishly and sinfully. And I've been far away from you. I admit that. And I ask you, Jesus, to forgive me. To take away my shame and my guilt, my regrets, and give me a fresh start. And Jesus, I believe that you came into this world to show the way of love and peace and justice. And you were willing to die on the cross of Calvary for the sins of the world, including my sins. That you were buried in a tomb and raised to new life. So there would be the hope of new life for folks like me. So Jesus, I put my trust in you to the depths of my soul, believing that you're the one who can rescue me. And Jesus, I make the commitment today and for all of my days to seek to live in your way, to live a life of obedience and caring and compassion and never failing love, to give myself to others so that they might see Jesus in me. Thank you for not giving up on me, for reaching out to me when I was sinking. And as I make the decision today to become a Christian, a follower of yours, Lord, may I just know the joy that comes with that and the sense of fulfillment and purpose that you want for my life. I love you, Jesus. Amen. If you prayed that prayer of commitment, and even if you didn't, I invite you to go to our website, journeyconnection.com, and fill out the eConnect card there. Let us know of any decision that you've made today. Let us know if you have spiritual questions you'd like for us to dialogue with you about. Let us know how we might pray for you or encourage you. We want for you to experience the life-changing grace and mercy and forgiveness of Jesus. And if Journey Church can help you with that, please let us know. And if you are a follower of Jesus and you want to live in His way, we want to give you an opportunity as a part of your worship, as a part of our online congregation, to give, because being a follower of Jesus means to be a giving, generous person. So again, we invite you to go to our website, journeyconnection.com, and click on the giving link there, and to give financially, because that allows this ministry to take place. It allows us to bless the lives of children and youth, people who are hungry or hurting or in need. It allows us to show that being a Christian can really help people in our community and around the world. And when you give to Journey, we send a part of that to our mission partners, one of whom is Habitat for Humanity. Thank you for giving through Journey to groups like that so that we can make a real difference in our world. May God bless you and be with you this coming week.